Okay,
No.
we are live.
It's not working.
So let's open with prayer. Holy God, we thank you for this opportunity that we can engage in this important study and discuss how it impacts us today. I thank you for each one of these who are dedicated to this time and exploring ways that we can bring this important lesson into the community at large. Guide us and direct us in our studies and remind us that we are your beloveds, each and every one of us uniquely created to be yours. We pray all this in your many holy names. Amen. All right, Lisa, it's all yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay. I thought nobody could hear me. Okay. Well, so I don't need this. All right. In my technical difficulties.
I'm muting everyone so that there's not a bleed over. So if you want to interject or talk, ask questions, whatever, if you will just unmute yourself or signal so that I can unmute you.
Okay, the first thing I wanted to talk about was the Carter years. Carter projected himself as a populist, a guy for the people. And I feel like our new president, Joe Biden, has done the same thing. So what did you guys think of the Carter years when it said he was just as much for the rich people as just about anybody else? What did you guys think of that?
I was surprised to hear that he was a wealthy peanut farmer. I knew he grew peanuts, but I didn't know that he was wealthy and that he had been so heavily supported by business people.
I didn't either.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Well, I would, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
I was shocked that he vetoed help to Vietnam, sort of saying that, well, we fought them, but then they fought us, so we're just as, our position is just as bad as theirs. And the commentary from Zinn is that, yes, our planes, flew half across the continent, to bomb this other country that is not even anywhere close to us. So how is it that, they didn't come to hurt us? So that was just absolutely shocking.
I thought so too.
Ted?
It really slipped me. I'm trying to place the Carter in Vietnam. He was a Navy graduate of Annapolis and then had to resign from the Navy when his father died to take a hold of the family business. But much of his talking, and Clinton has the same problem coming from Arkansas, the sounds progressive did not turn out that way because the North understood the verbiage, not the background of the South, which was inherently, even for a liberal in the South, would be a conservative in the North at times. So this did not adequately enter into it. And I don't think Zinn does an adequate job of recognizing the regional differences when the similar language is used, but it comes from a different perspective.
Okay, my further question is, we have this brand new start with Biden and Harris. What are letters that we can write to them, or what are the kinds of things we can say to them to make sure, or how can we fact check them to make sure that he really is for people and not just for rich people? Katya?
I was just about to raise my hand, you know, officially.
I can tell.
Well, I actually read a little bit into the next chapter, which is very good. And Zin points out that you know, we're sort of taught a paradigm where we have voice once every 4 years, and then we go vote, and you know, if our candidate wins, then you know, we go back to rest, you know, and then vote again in 4 years. And that's actually something that, you know, when Obama was campaigning for Biden, he said something along these lines, which I found very interesting. He said, well, if Hillary Clinton had been elected, you would all be having brunch right now instead of being here. And what his words imply is that sort of once we elect what we consider the right candidate, then we can just like stop participating. And I think it's this, you know, restlessness of the electorate, this kind of constant like stirring and disruption of the system that I think it's necessary to keep the system uneasy. So whatever it takes, you know, protests, you know, pressuring the representatives, because one of what they point out, one of Obama's mistakes was when he was elected, he had such a strong base behind him, but when he was elected president, his message to the base was kind of like, okay, now let me rule. Rule was not the verb he used, but it's sort of like, okay, now you can go back to sleep and I will make the decisions. And so the base was discouraged.
Yeah, and I think that I don't perceive it to be very effective to write letters to the president.
Yeah.
I think it's more important to put pressure on your own senators and representatives to support what initiatives you think they should be backing. And because even if the person that you voted for got elected and you agreed with the things they campaigned on, they can't make it happen if Congress doesn't get behind those very same issues. So I would also say again, just another commercial for that, our common, I'm forgetting the name of it already, but that book that I've been kind of promoting about how we can make the system more responsive to the citizenry. I think some of those systemic changes are really worth pursuing.
Nita, did you have something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we have to watch what he concentrates on. If he concentrates on some of the social issues, the Black Lives Matter, the equality, or if he goes with the health care, and I mean, just some of the important things to the progressive side. I think we have to go with that. And even if he doesn't get them passed, we need to see if he touches them, if he tries, because he's very much the diplomat and he's used to working with the other side. And so he knows we can't just go bullying in there and say, okay, this is what I want, do it or else. That doesn't work. And so I think we're going to see him try to push a little bit in all the different places, but we need to watch where he is pushing.
Anybody else? Ken.
Dave.
I think that, yeah, it makes more sense rather than write to the president, because I think the fact that we elected our current president-elect means that we trust or believe in a lot of the positions that he's taken and that he has agreed to. But it makes more sense to write to representatives and senators. And I guess I'm fortunate that I'm in a position where my representative and senators adequately represent my view of the country and the direction we should be going. Where I feel inadequate is I feel like I should have some way to influence other people in Congress, other representatives and senators, which maybe aren't from this state. But I don't know how that's done. I feel pretty powerless in that area, but that's where the pressure needs to be.
Agreed.
Gabe?
I think I'm assuming that Biden will get elected and all, but what I really fear is we're going to suffer from a severe hangover for quite a while from the last 4 years, and I'm kind of doubtful that anything's going to get done for quite a while, simply because of what we've been going through. And I think basically we need to get some civility back in our country, and then maybe we can start doing some good things.
Amen. Ryan?
Saw some news articles, and I think I read an article in the Atlantic about how the Democratic Party came together to get somebody who wasn't Trump in the White House, but almost immediately, as soon as the election results came out, the party sort of broke in pieces again, where some people were saying, we can't ever say socialism again. We can't talk about Medicare for all anymore because there isn't enough support for those sorts of things, and we won't hold the White House or Congress at all if we don't do that. So I think it's important to continue to advocate for the policies that align with our interpretation of the gospel, that care for the least of these, the people who are least heard. What I'm hearing from leaders in the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities is that we need to listen to the women of those communities, because they have been the ones that hold their communities together and do the most advocacy and organizing within their communities. And if we're going to move toward empowering people who have been marginalized and oppressed, we have to listen to those communities and advocate for what they say is the most powerful healing agent for their communities. Almost the worst thing we could do would be to tell them how we're going to fix the problems that they are experiencing. It's not for us to do. It's to support the people who are doing the work that they feel needs to be done.
Katya?
Well, I think civility doesn't exist by itself. It comes out of, out of the feeling that people matter and others or those in power take care of them. Like I just recently heard an interview where, about unity, and the gentleman who's a professor at a college talked about how there's no unity unless you have common fate. What it means that like everyone in the society sort of feels like that, they have common fate. And today, the fate of millionaires and billionaires is very much not the fate of the indigenous people, of the, Black people, of the poor people, and the, absence of civility came out of righteous anger of the bottom of the society. I mean, I don't endorse, by no means do I endorse absence of civility, but at the same time, I do understand that people are angry. It seems like no matter for who you vote, everything still goes to the 1% at the top, and Democrats are complicit. I mean, they voted, they keep voting to support the military-industrial complex. There are never any questions asked about money going that way. So I really do feel that up until those elected or those in power start, qualitatively, significantly addressing the needs of those at the bottom, there's not going to be any civility. In fact, I'm afraid that if Biden doesn't make any, sufficient, doesn't take any sufficient steps and introduce any sufficient changes that make people's lives better, there's going to be even more absence of civility, and there's going to be even more anger.
You're right about that. Ted?
But when we go to write, because when I have written too often, I get nothing but a blasted form letter back. We have to be able to identify with where we're at, as well as the, like say, congressman or senator. Like Heinrich is a hunter. You don't write a letter wanting guns banned, but he also has no use for people weapons like the AK-47 in people's hands. You can talk about automatic weapons, at the same time defend the rights, particularly for the hunter, to a rifle and a shotgun, because they're not particularly effective usually against people. So you have to nuance some of this. Or like, I firmly believe we need to have the Trump tax cut repealed. That's going to cost me money. And I'm going to have to put that in the letter that I know that it's going to hit my pocket. But for the good of society, it needs to be done.
Amen.
So this gives a feel that I know what some of the results are, and it's going to hit me. But for the good of the whole society, this is the kind of progressive action that is needed.
That's right. And I think a lot of the campaigns have been mistitled, which only causes more problems, like defunding the police. That's been used against the effort because it was, I think, wrongly titled and not communicated out well. And then same thing with gun control. They call it gun control instead of gun reform. Well, anytime you throw the word control in there, people freak out. So we need to retitle that from gun control to gun reform, and defund the police to something that's a little more understandable what is trying to be done. Of course, defund the police does mean something different to different groups of people, for sure. I want to note that Betsy put in the chat the name of the book that Jennifer was talking about, Our Common Purpose. That's the name of the book. So if you missed that last time. And Katya just wrote, we always have more impact on the local level. Yes, city, county, and state. That's where change happens. And then it feeds up to the top, for sure. Katya, you had your hand up?
Well, I think Nita was before me, so I'll defer.
All right, go ahead, Nita.
Oh, okay. I was thinking that I agree with you totally about the way we, the verbiage that we use. And I think it's the same thing with socialism, because that has such a connection to communism, I think, that's seen in the same light as communism is. So I think that's in some circles, that's a real poisonous word. And I think that needs to be rephrased. And I hate that Bernie Sanders uses that word, because I think it really throws a bad light on what he's saying.
Well, the opposition to it has done a good job of twisting that whole concept anyway. I put on my Facebook page a week or so ago, I kept getting tired of people using communism or socialism as a fear tactic to not vote for Biden. And I put the definition of it and how it is used and properly used and how it is effective and properly effective on my Facebook page. Got a little bit of pushback, mostly an understanding of what socialism really is. So it was helpful. But you're right, we need to use that term properly. Katya?
Well, just kind of food for thought. I don't know if you guys know who George Lakoff is. He's a very talented linguist. He's published several books. I mean, he's just like kind of like Noam Chomsky, but he's more like a linguist. He's an incredible messenger, and he's the one, who really has some like very refined messages. So he actually, I read on his blog, after the 2016 election that he actually approached the Clinton campaign and volunteered to work for them, and he was rejected. So there's a part of me that, you know, makes me think that I don't think a lot of the times those people who are running for office, it's not that they can't, I just think they don't want to, because they really don't want to be elected and then be sort of, you know, confronted by the demands of the populace that, you know, they ran on those platforms. They don't want to have any forget about communism, communalism, you know, policies, because they're accountable to the lobbies, they're accountable to the, you know, the capitalist interests.
Can
Ted?
you, oh, just a second, Ted, can you spell the name, Katya?
I'll put it in chat.
Okay, thank you. Now, Ted.
Just as an offhand observation, I wonder how many of the Trump supporters are pulling Social Security.
Well, and I even said unemployment, the CARES Act, all of that is socialism. So.
Yep.
And there's a hypocrisy here that is the elephant in the room.
Yeah, that's right.
I totally agree with that, but it's a charged word. And that's the problem.
Just like liberal and conservative, I wrote about that in my newsletter article. We can't be using those labels. They are loaded terms. Anne?
Well, I think people have alluded to the lack of civility in government. I think there's also a lack of integrity to some degree, where people are concerned about maintaining power and they don't look at, well, what does the country need? And they're looking about, well, what's good for my party and how can I maintain my party's control or get my party to have control? But I liked what Brother Ryan said about, you know, we have to look about how do we empower the marginalized? What do the Gospels call us to do? And that seems more like a mission of something we can try to look for. That's all.
Okay, I just wanted to say I have some experience in writing letters to our state legislators and city legislators, because I did the union for my fellow music and art teachers. And we tried to figure out ways to do it really well. So one thing that we thought of is you don't want to be very verbose. They're super busy. They don't have time unless you want to explain something and say, here is an explanation of what I mean by gun control or whatever. But the fewer words you use, the better. And the art teachers, we would have writing sessions, and the art teachers would make us cards that were colorful and, you know, eye-opening. They made you notice them. And then we would practice writing on another piece of paper, and then we would, you know, make it more succinct and short to talk about what we wanted. And I don't remember who told me this, if it was one of the legislators or what, is that when you send an email, and again, you make it short, sweet, pithy, you know, with few words, that they guesstimate, and maybe Anne and Katya can help me with this because I can't remember. They count that as like 10 people writing, you know, when they do that. And then if you write a handwritten letter, and also make sure it's legible, make sure you write very legibly. And then they would say that was like 15 people. You know, I can't, do you ladies remember? Katya?
I just remember that I think calls are the best. I actually, like, my phone used to be like hot during the legislative session here in New Mexico. And I remember calling one time about, like, I don't even know which issue. And the secretary said, said, my phone has been ringing nonstop, you know, and I think that's when change happens, you know, when, and especially here on the local level, you know, that's, you know, when the phone is ringing nonstop is, you know, that's disruptive.
There you go. Anne, did you have anything to say?
No, I was trying to just look up on my phone how many those counted for, and I don't know. Betsy, you had your hand up earlier. Did you have a comment?
That's what I saw too.
I just was going to say, you know, it's all in how you word it, like everybody's been saying. In this chapter, I was just blown away by how welfare is such a bad word and people have a bad connotation. They don't want people on welfare. They look down at people on welfare. But if you ask them if they think the needy or the poor should get more assistance, now they're willing to help with that. So I just to reiterate, it's said several times in the chapter about that, and it's so very true. So that's all I had to say.
Well, that's a good point.
Sorry I missed you. I'm trying to keep up with all the spaces in here, and you're in the shadow a little bit. So sorry I missed that.
That's all right.
But I am trying to keep attention on whose hands up. Ted.
I was actually working for the Human Service Department for welfare during the Clinton so-called reforms to end. And that is part of the verbiage which will be go online to listen to Wednesday morning. So that a conversation will come up again next week.
Okay, the last thing I wanted to say for this chapter, and then we'll move on to Eleanor, is that it really helped. And I got lots and lots more people to come and help write to our legislators and whatnot when we were doing it for school people, for, you know, teachers. And I thought that's an idea for another Zoom meeting if we see issues that we want taken care of. And I agree, writing to a president, you know, no, you have to write to your representatives and they take it to the legislators. So that point was made by several people. So that was my last point. If we want to do letter writing campaigns, they work really well together. And they're really fun with art teachers because they make something really pretty for you to write on that's eye-catching. Okay, thank you. And Eleanor, go ahead.
I just want to say letter writing campaigns are perfect for churches to do. Once we can get back together, we can set up a table out in the narthex for people to write letters. I've seen it done in several churches. And it's a good way to get people motivated and to be the citizens that we're all called to be, regardless of our faith tradition. And we can do that through our social justice team meets on Tuesday. We can have a conversation with social justice to promote that, because we can write letters now. We don't have to wait until we have a letter writing campaign at the church.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Eleanor?
Okay. I'm going to hit some of the bigger issues that have happened in the 80s and 90s, early 90s. And one of the things that he just sort of mentions in passing is the fall of the Iron Curtain, the Soviet Union. The Berlin Wall came down. And I can't help but see that this is making a big difference to people in the West as well as to them. So, you know, the question I would put it in is, how has the fall of the Soviet Union affected us here in the West? You think it has? That was a big deal.
Katya?
In the world's consciousness. Is the world now more dangerous than ever?
Well, you know, one of the things that Zim points out is that, you know, after the kind of dissolution of the Soviet Union, people in America were hoping to see, a huge cut in the military budget because the rationale for having such a bloated military budget was the danger of communism. So it was a 2% cut initially for the first couple of years, and then, it went up again. So, that kind of, that really shows that that's, it's not really the fear of communism. It's just supporting that military industrial complex and the profits. Oops, sorry.
Okay, anyone else got some input? Yeah, Ken.
I don't know if it's a real concern or just an idea that was perpetuated, but even though the Soviet Union dissolved, someone still was in control of nuclear missiles. And,
Yeah.
unless there was disarmament actively going on in peace talks, there's that threat still exists, and a large part of it is still with Russia, which is the greatest concentration of what used to control the Soviet Union, but they still have the missiles. There are missiles in other countries, so that part of the threat still hasn't diminished.
Yeah, that is true. And we're facing a possible another, what we already got out of one of our treaties. Hopefully we'll get back to one.
Jennifer?
It's not necessarily better or worse, but I think that the difference is things became less predictable. You had to start paying attention to all kinds of little places instead of just like the Soviet bloc was, all one block. And so it wasn't necessarily good, but at some level it seemed simpler to think about. And you sort of trusted that they would control their block and we would control our block, and that would somehow make things more peaceful was, I think, what a lot of the military industrial complex, how they looked at it. And so I think when the wall fell, it actually made the military system, and by that I'm including the laboratories where my dad worked at Sandia Laboratories his whole career. It made them more nervous, not less.
Yeah.
And I think that has to do partly with why we didn't really see a peace benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Betsy, did you have your hand up? Okay. No? Okay. Katya?
One of the lesser known facts is that when Reagan and Gorbachev negotiated the reunification of Germany, Gorbachev asked Reagan for an assurance that NATO would not place its arms on the, around the Russian border, that it would not enter into the, what used to be Eastern Germany. And Reagan gave that promise, but orally, and that promise never was on paper. Well, people who like to talk about the danger coming from Russia may not realize that, there are, NATO, warheads, aimed at Russia, like all around the Russian border in the West, in like Poland, in Germany, like everywhere. And the comparison would be, it would be interesting. I know how Americans would feel, if Russia had a military base in Mexico and, like, let's say had, the military like all along the border. I think actually Russia feels by far more in danger from the United States than the United States today is from Russia with all the, Russophobia even existing in the American society.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ted?
There is, fortunately, a practical limit to this. The designers of these special weapons get carried away, and they came up with a little device called a Davy Crockett, which amounted to a nuclear warhead that could be carried as a backpack, and that the private could carry the delivery mechanism, and proceeded to deploy that thing in Western Europe. And it scared our allies so bad that the NATO allies forced the United States to withdraw that weapon. And now the government doesn't even want to admit it ever existed, though they had copies at one time at the Nuclear Museum. But there is a point at which, like they're currently discussing, producing more pits. I don't know what the world inventory is of pits right now, but it so far exceeds any possible utilization that the thought of making more of them is silly. Yet the complex wants to start producing more of these plutonium pits. And plutonium is not only a bomb material, it's also a very poisonous metal. And it's a byproduct of all the nuclear reactors. So as a byproduct, when they're recycling their fuel, this stuff keeps being churned out. And how do you control it? It's everywhere.
Okay. So I'm going to come closer to home here and ask the question, how did Latino American culture differ from mainstream Anglo-American culture? Is there some real differences that we can see? And I'm talking about this because we're talking also about New Mexico. And Jen uses a lot of some of the Latino things that were going on, including in 1988 when Tejerina
Reyes
Lopez
Tejerina
yeah.
had his little escapade up in Rio Arriba County, occupying the county courthouse.
Okay, I see a chat going on here. Yeah, Nita.
I also think, and I was watching some of the news programs this morning, and they were talking about this, the Latino vote, and they were talking about, like in Florida, that a lot of it was the reason Biden didn't get more of a vote there was because there wasn't a ground game there that was established in that part of Florida, where there was more of one in some of the other places, like in Arizona, that and California, that got a good vote, Latino vote. But some of the places that didn't was because that for the past 4 years, they hadn't had the ground game working on that section, that place, Cuban Americans.
So, okay, Ted.
The Latino community
Sorry, I
is
wasn't
not monolithic.
muted.
This is a mistake that the politicians tend to make. You have, yes, a lot of Roman Catholic. You also now have in some countries like Guatemala, more Pentecostal Protestants than you have Roman Catholics, and they're coming north into the country. You have the Cuban exiles, which are way right in South Florida, and you have the Puerto Ricans, which are actually U.S. citizens to begin with, that tend to be to the left. It's not a monolithic community, and he got treated like that, and that's a mistake.
That's right. And
Yeah, Lori Wrigley.
you listen to the Cubans and Mexicans and South America, they're all different people with their own different identity too.
Yeah,
Laura.
And that's why they're using the term Latinx now, because there are too many different groups to group them all together. So I think the politically correct or whatever term now these days is Latinx with all the
That's right.
cross mixing.
Latinx.
Yeah.
Latinx.
Well, part of the problem too is that these are words are gender specific. So when they, like the AAUW had an article a while back talking about Latino women. To me, this is a contradiction. You'd say Latina, but the lack of the knowledge of the Spanish in much of the United States causes a lot of confusion as well.
Okay.
Ryan.
And I just recently learned that Latinx is a term ascribed by white academics. It's not a term that people it's supposed to describe use for themselves. And so it's not their term. And I don't have enough folks in my circles to know how to call them except these terms that white people came up with. So it's because it's not a monolith, because it's so diverse set of communities, maybe we shouldn't lump them together. Maybe we should refer to them by their own community names, whether it's the country or the language group, or recognize the diversity.
Yeah, I would consider the term Latinx to be insulting almost personally.
Well,
think
it's a gender neutral term that's meant to be inclusive of all of the
Latino y Latina.
Yes.
It's the same
Yeah,
thing.
but it does go beyond just a group of people, and so it's just another way of
Grouping.
classifying people to have some power and control over them.
I think that's part of what I was trying to say is they were talking about today is that you need to have representation for who you're working for in the communities. So then you will know the communities. And so if you don't have that, those communities aren't going to respond to what you're saying because you don't know what their issues are.
Well, and that's part of what we're doing with Albuquerque FaithWorks is as we are responding to the needs of those on the margins, the at risk of homelessness, we have as a board chosen to open up board membership to include those who are experiencing homelessness because it's following the city's model of the Homeless Advisory Council of including people who are in that community because they know better what they need. And when we are trying to project onto them what they need, we don't get the full picture of what that life is like. And so we have made that choice on Albuquerque FaithWorks to include that voice so that they are a part of their own solution and their own decision making instead of us imposing it on them. Katya.
My comment was actually going to be along the same lines. I feel we're always talking about, politicians going to certain communities and trying to convince the people, like sending like their message to the people of why the people should vote for them, as opposed to like, what is it that this community needs and what do the people want? And the thing is that there's a huge disparity today between, like when people get polled on ideas, actually things like Social Security, Medicare for all, and Green New Deal are like in the 60-70% approval across the board, Democrat or Republican, but the politicians don't run on them. It's like there's this disconnect between the ideas that people want and the policies that people want, and like what the politicians actually run on, and therefore it's no surprise that there's such apathy. And another thing is, I don't know if anyone has seen that, but that was like around the summer when Biden was invited by I don't follow this Charlemagne, I think his name. He's a black, he has like a show, and you know, he was actually like this gentleman, this black gentleman. I don't know if he's just like a comedian or, you know, he was questioning Biden about, you know, the policies, and Biden said to him, and I watched that video. I mean, it's not like fake news or anything. Biden said, "Well, man, if you are not gonna vote for me, you ain't black." And that was like serious, like seriously, speak of, you know, talking to communities of you know, any kind of community, be that black community. I just think, I don't know, it's almost like I feel like the people have to explain themselves to politicians why they refuse to support them, while it should be the other way around, you know.
Okay, while we're on,
Ken?
I'm sorry, Ken.
I think rather than talking to a particular ethnic group or as being a base of support, politicians should talk about the issues that might appeal to those particular groups, and not say Black people will support me, or Hispanic, Latino people will support me. Also, going back to Eleanor, your original question, you asked about differences between Latinos and Anglos, and I think we're too melded to be able to answer that question, at least in my mind, because I grew up in New Mexico. As far as I know, I have no Hispanic ancestry, but I still consider myself to be very seasoned in the culture of New Mexico, and that's a very integral part of my life and my personality, what makes me who I am.
Right. Okay, and this.
Lori?
Sorry, Lori.
I think it's hard for the politicians to concentrate on anything that anybody else needs when so much of their attention has to go to get reelected in the next round of elections.
Yeah, unfortunately.
That's true.
Anybody else? I don't have everybody on one screen.
That's why I'm here to kind
I'm
of
glad. I only
post
get
it.
9 boxes.
Yeah,
So
that's kind of my job. I interject my own opinion into things, but my primary job here is to kind of see everybody that raises their hand and wants to participate. So
the other big events that happened in those years, late 80s and early 90s, were the nuclear disasters, 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl. And out of that came a very strong anti-nuclear movement. So, which I haven't heard much from lately myself, but I'm sure it's still there. And so who's in that? And is there any way, is nuclear energy our future or not? Yeah, I see Ryan. Do you want to talk, Ryan?
according to Matt, we need it to be. He wants it to be. That's his job.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I had a good conversation with Matt, I don't know, back in April or May, and he was working with scientists in his field to come up with a new safety protocol, that the new nuclear power plants that are being designed have a safety radius of 400 feet instead of 10 miles. And the product of that is hot water, which can then be used to heat buildings through radiators or run other, you could use it for showering and all that sort of thing, which makes them much more efficient, and the safety level has gone up drastically. We need to figure out what to do with the spent fuel, and I know there are ways to get additional use out of that. But, our U.S. Navy has been running on nuclear power. Their ships have been running for 50 years and haven't refueled yet. It's really powerful, and I think we need to go that way.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ted.
Our youngest was a Navy nuke, and now as at Los Alamos. But one of the reasons they have not had any problems in the Navy operation is the very incredible strictness which applies to their engineers. And it's sort of a joke in that department of the Navy that, to my knowledge, no person who has served the Navy as a nuclear engineer has ever re-upped in the same position. They're burned out. The pressure they're put on to be absolutely perfect on every nut and every bolt that goes into that construction and maintenance is simply incredible.
Jennifer, you've got a little experience with that.
Yeah, our son is got his PhD in nuclear, well, in physics.
Right.
But
Jennifer?
So anyone else?
I don't
Jen-
really remember the details. It's just something my dad, like I said, my dad worked at Sandia Lab. Other countries do recycle their nuclear waste for power. France, other places do it. And I want to say it might have been President Carter that made that illegal here. And
I don't know.
I can't remember the reason, but it certainly seems like it needs to be revisited. We have all this nuclear waste. If it could be used for power safely,
Yeah.
rather than it piling up. I mean, that's my main objection to expanding nuclear power is if we're just going to create more waste that we don't recycle, then that's where I want to say, what are you doing with all the waste then? That's otherwise I understand it's better for the climate and everything except for the weight. And I don't know, I can't remember what the excuse was for why we don't do it here, even though other countries do.
Yeah, Ted.
Well, France does a major amount of the nuclear fuel reprocessing, not only for themselves, but for others. And Japan, I think, has the highest per capita energy from nuclear sources, but they do not reprocess. That's part of the peace treaty, really. So they send it to France to get reprocessed, and then they ship the reprocessed stuff back to Japan. So Japan literally has tons of plutonium in storage, which of course makes bombs, but they've not yet figured out to use that adequately for power production. Theoretically, it's possible, but we're still in a uranium cycle for the power. And we got some engineering problems, and we have potential security problems of a very high level dealing with some of the reprocessed materials.
Well, of course, Japan has had their own problem with the Fukushima plant after the earthquake. They're still fighting that one. So
that's right.
There's got to be more safety measures. Okay, I think we're about at the time limit here. And I didn't bring up the welfare thing because Ted tells me we're going to revisit that. I was going to ask a question on that, but we'll do that next time.
There we go.
Anyway, anyone else got any comments?
I just want to make an analogy, like Ryan put that, maybe the waste doesn't get reprocessed because of mining interests. Something that popped up in my head at that point, there's the big issue in New Mexico of produced water, a very controversial bill that Lujan Grisham signed in the legislative session last year is to allow using the produced water that comes out of, oil and fracking production to be used for agriculture. And my question is always like, well, why don't they make, if supposedly produced water is so safe and so good, why don't they make those oil companies reduce that? But no, reuse that. But no, somehow oil and fracking companies want to use the, clean drinking water, and they're sending the produced water our way because we don't have any power.
what the oil companies use is not clean water. I mean, what they put into fracking is not clean. That's the waste from everything else they've done.
Obviously, right, but they're looking at how to repurpose it for agriculture, so.
I know, and I mean, so we know, not unless they, unless they can get a water out, they're not, because they're not getting water now. I mean, it's nasty, nasty stuff.
Yeah.
I think what you're talking about on the Nuclear Waste Policy Act shows that it was in 1982 signed in by Reagan.
Reagan.
Is
Okay.
that what you were referring to as that act? It's where they determined a repository for high-level radioactive waste. So it may be the one that you're talking about.
Okay.
Good conversation. I always enjoy and learn a lot from these conversations. So we have one more session next Sunday, covering the last 3 chapters, and the lecture is already recorded and will be available on Wednesday. And then we'll have Thanksgiving, a week off, and then I'm going to start an Advent study called A Weary World. So I'll be sending that out too, just kind of speaking to what we're experiencing right now and COVID and all these other crises, but still finding the hope in the world around us. So I'll send that out. And if anybody's interested, let me know. If you need the book, let me know. I'm ordering several more. Lisa?
That's available on Kindle for $8. I just got it.
Yes.
It's
Lisa?
it's cheaper than buying the hardback or the paperback.
Right.
Okay, I just want to put forth just to be thinking of, this will be, after Christmas and whatnot in January, if we want to start another book club and how we choose a book. And like I have a ton of book ideas and Dawn has a ton of them, and I'm sure you guys do too. So what is a practical way that we could gather a list of books and vote on them? Or do you have a better way to do it?
I don't know.
We can take a collection of ideas and then just put them before the folks who want to continue on for another study and decide what we're going to do, then publicize it and invite others to join in on the study.
Okay, so you all be thinking of books that are highly interesting to you, like give 3 examples or something, and we'll figure out how to collect them and then decide which one we want.
And you've all got my email address since you get the Zoom link from me. So even those of you who are not members of Monte Vista, you are still in this Zoom link email. So feel free, if you have ideas, to just email reply to that, and I'll get those over to Lisa and Eleanor to start collecting a list.
Thank you.
Good. Well, have a great week. Be safe. Remember, we are on restrictions again.